On today's show, we have Nick Chapman from Lotus Coffee. Now, Nick has an amazing background in engineering, but has decided to dive into the specialty coffee realm by helping us improve one of the most important elements in the coffee brewing experience: water. Now, water is one of the most overlooked. Most people have tried everything to improve their coffee, make it taste better, have it extract perfectly, but if you don't have proper water and you don't have the right things in your water, your coffee just won't be good. This is the podcast that's going to show you exactly what you need to improve your coffee. So sit back, buckle up, we're in for a good one. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh.
Okay, so I have been following you for a while, and the things that you are offering the coffee community is quite amazing, and I'm super excited to dig in to all of this pretty much because if I can find any ways to like increase or actually improve my coffee, I'm going to. And when I found out that you were finding different ways to improve your water, which I think is pretty much overlooked, I'm definitely going to do it. So let's dive into like a bio, pretty much like where you're from and how you got into coffee, and pretty much how Lotus started.
Yeah, so honestly, I think it's relevant to kind of start back with my education, engineering. I really enjoyed that. And some of my favorite classes, oddly enough, are pretty relevant to coffee. Thermofluid dynamics is probably my favorite class from that, and really is essentially what's happening inside of a pour over. After that, though, after I graduated, I actually wasn't into coffee. I only drank specialty coffee. And realistically, I drank it, with sugar and cream and stuff like that. And in fact, I
Right.
started out drinking the Keurig at the office, and that's kind of what really got me into specialty coffee. Is that coffee was not tasty.
Right.
I definitely wanted something to kind of drink in that environment. So there's actually a local roaster called Provision, and kind of became friends with the barista there, and he realistically just kind of showed me the world of coffee, gave me my first really good tasting brew. I think that's an experience that a lot of us had. I know your story is kind of similar. You had a pour over in Germany. I think you said that just
Right.
really changed your world. It's kind of a similar experience for me. But at the time, I wasn't necessarily like thinking of coffee as a career, and I didn't even brew at home either. But as time went on, I just kind of got more curious, and eventually kind of picked up home brewing. And actually, I had a blade grinder to start,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of, I think I just looked up a pour over recipe and bought some local beans, and it was really bad. It was almost undrinkable. And so I kind of, I don't want to say gave up. I knew I wanted to pursue brewing coffee kind of as a hobby more, but I just,
Mm-hmm.
and I did know the grinder was part of it. And actually, Fellow released the Ode, and I remember that pretty specifically because I was actually at work on lunch, and I typically don't, open spam emails or anything like that. But Kickstarter sent me an email, and it was for the Fellow Ode Kickstarter, and I
Right.
saw that grinder, and it was so beautiful. I didn't need to read anything else about it. I was like, you know what, this is my start
Yeah,
here.
I need
Uh,
this.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I bought that instantly, and I just didn't really think much of it until it arrived. I can't even remember how long it took. It was at least a couple months, but yeah, it showed up, and from there, then I was like, all right, I bought this grinder. It wasn't super cheap. It wasn't a really expensive one, but I gotta start making good coffee. And I was really fascinated by how difficult it was. It was partly frustrating, but it's also really exciting that there was kind of this really tasty beverage you could make. So the goal was really desirable, but it was kind of difficult to get there. There were a lot of variables you had to play with. There's a lot of learning involved, and I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. And that's really kind of where I applied my background of engineering and not being in coffee. I took a very scientific approach to brewing. People like Jonathan Gagne, Scott Rao, some of their books really provided like a lot of cool information for me to experiment in that world. Um, and as far as kind of how that relates to Lotus, just kind of as I went deeper into it and really kind of stopped, like you were saying earlier, kind of improving your brew, just that extra step. When I came across water and its impact, my mind was blown. It was
Right.
just, the water we have here in Arizona, especially. So if you have okay water to brew with, you're gonna see a difference, but it's not gonna be too crazy. But if you have bad water, you simply, it's just like if you have bad coffee, you can't make it taste good. And same thing, if you have bad water, you there's nothing you can do. And the water here kind of prevented that from me making good coffee at home. And kind of after that, I without going into too much detail, I did solve that problem, but it meant sourcing salts, mixing them in different concentrations at home, and weighing it out and kind of figuring out that whole workflow. And it was pretty tedious, but the difference it made was worth it. So I asked myself, why wasn't this told to me? Why didn't some of these books put more emphasis on the water? Why isn't this talked about more in the coffee community? And the answer to that question was that it's kind of difficult. Water, I don't think as a whole, it's actually kind of a series of pretty simple problems, but there's quite a few of them. There's a lot of units to work with. What water do you want? So there really was quite a bit of content to learn. And at the end of it, I felt like you could kind of package it in something that didn't require all that knowledge to be able to utilize playing with your water's minerality. And so really that's kind of the goal of Lotus was to allow and create accessibility to people to be able to easily utilize this variable, but without having to do kind of all the research and development of kind of figuring out the workflow and how to make that a possibility in a home setting that wasn't super time consuming.
Right. Now, was this a eureka moment for you? Like when you were, let's just say you were making a pour over, or the first time you actually dabbled in, uh, I guess manipulating your water, was it like, "Oh, man, I'm onto something here," once you brewed that first cup that was like, "Oh, man, that the way I, formulated that water made a huge difference."
Yeah, so there are actually kind of a couple of eureka moments. The first one was discovering that water was the variable that I had really been missing, kind of where I was very off on that variable. And it's actually, I went back to that the first specialty shop that I went to, Provision, and it's kind of in the afternoon. I was getting a coffee and I ordered an iced Americano.
Mm.
And if I'm being honest, I kind of just wanted the water. I actually didn't want a coffee. I usually don't drink coffee in the afternoon, but I was drinking it. And I turned to my friend. I was like, man, your water is just so delicious. I wish I could just have a cup of water. And that was my first eureka moment. I was like, hey, this
Right.
Americano I'm drinking is largely delicious because the water is good tasting. And then, when I applied that to brewing at home, I was confident that would make a difference. And there was kind of a second eureka moment when I made good water, just kind of standard water. I actually used Barista Hustle was the first kind of blog and recipe that I followed. And I followed, just kind of, I think it's called like the Barista Hustle recipe.
Mhm.
And that made great coffee. But then when I changed the minerals, when I used calcium instead of magnesium, that was kind of the second eureka moment where I was like, okay, not only is water important, but just changing the source of hardness or the source of alkalinity that you're using is having another, just that next level of difference in my brew.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that was definitely, I was surprised when I discovered that, how much of an impact just changing the ingredients in the water can make.
So so when you first start out in coffee, so like just your average guy starting out or a girl starting out in like, start dabbling in espresso and learning how to make specialty cup or not even specialty cups, just learning how to dial coffee in. Did you go through a lot of batches when you were first trying to dial your water in for brewing coffee?
No, not for the water. Simply because at that point I was fairly confident kind of with the other variables. Uh,
Okay.
so instead of kind of like trying to dial it in over time, I kind of broke it apart. And so I actually did cuppings where I would taste the different, I went out and bought a bunch of kettles from Target because I wasn't
Mhm.
going to buy, a bunch of Ode kettles or something like that, or not Ode,
Right.
Bellow kettles. But yeah, I bought a bunch of kettles that I could do 4 at a time. And they were all the same temperature to kind of make the cupping accurate. And yeah, I just started cupping the different minerals for the water. So I would do like 70 or 80 parts per million of just calcium hardness. And then I would do just 70 or 80 parts per million of magnesium. And I would do just alkalinity and kind of split the components up that way. And when you do that, especially if you're familiar with cupping, if you do cupping regularly, I
Right.
think that's a really easy way to very quickly understand generally what each ingredient's doing. It does become a little bit more difficult when you change the type of coffee because different coffees do tend to react differently to the ingredients.
Right. So I think coffee is I guess it's put in a different light as far as, like, what's important, as far as, like, how you should brew your coffee or what the most important elements of coffee are, and I feel like water is one of the most overlooked, elements of coffee, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and that's really what gave me the confidence to start Lotus is that that's exactly how I felt. Is that I was like, this variable is very important, and it's just that it's overlooked. It's not, not enough emphasis is placed on it. But I think there's a lot of things that are coming out in the coffee industry that things that we're doing now that we looked back a couple of years ago. It's like that was there are a lot of things that are overlooked. And I guess
Right.
to be specific about kind of things I'm talking about is like WDT or the Ross droplet technique. Just different tricks that we use to improve our brews. I think it's kind of we're in an amazing time in specialty coffee where the progression of learning of the community as a whole and kind of what we should be doing to make our coffee taste better
Right.
is progressing at a really fast rate. But yeah, water was, and I think still is for some people. I think there's a lot of people in the know, but there's still a lot of people who aren't prioritizing some of these really important variables.
Right. I so when it comes to, I guess, formulating Lotus, what is your process? I don't want you to give out, like, all your
Yeah.
details on how you do it, but, like,
So
what is, like, your main process when you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna go in and make this product, like,
yeah,
this is really what I'm looking at here."
funny enough, for anyone who wants to know, you can send me an email. It's nick@lotuscoffeeproducts.com, and I'm happy to share kind of how to do this at home. And I've contemplated a little bit with actually publishing a blog of telling people how to do this themselves. Ultimately, there's already blogs out there that tell you, so you can do this. The challenge with Lotus, or not the challenge, but there were some limitations because of the format that the product's in. Uh,
Okay.
so when you make these concentrates, really, you want to, the end goal is to be able to make water and make it with a specific minerality. So
Okay.
with Lotus, and there's lots of ways you can do that. The easiest one is literally buying the salts. You weigh them out and you make a concentrate. And the reason you make a concentrate is because there's so little by weight of these that if you wanted to make a 450 milliliter bottle, kind of our single dose bottle, and you just added the minerals directly, you would have to have a 0.001 milligram scale. And you're just adding tiny amounts. So
Right.
in most cases, you want to be starting with a concentrate. For Lotus specifically, kind of the innovation of Lotus that I added was the using of droppers to add the minerals. And the
Okay.
reason I chose that is because droppers are actually pretty consistent in terms of the weight of a water drop that they release. It's 0.04 milliliters. And when I kind of stumbled across this, I was really surprised. From there, though, you want to kind of choose a concentration for your concentrates. And the idea was to have kind of a consistent amount coming out from each of the ingredients, like relative to each other. So at the end of the day, when you add one drop of either of the hardness ingredients, which are
Mhm.
magnesium and calcium, they're both going to add 10 parts per million. when you're adding to our mixing bottle.
Okay.
So then you can, if you're familiar with water, you've been making it at home for a while, or friends like, hey, you should try this recipe out. It's easy to recreate that. You can just count the drops, or if your friend or whoever you're communicating with is also using Lotus, then you don't even need to talk about parts per million. It's just the drops. But that was kind of the idea behind determining the concentrations, because that's one of the big decisions that you need to make behind the product, that we could have done something different there. And the alkalinity ingredients are 5 parts per million per drop. And the reason for that actually is that, generally speaking, and I do agree with this, what a lot of people have found is that you have about twice as much hardness as you do alkalinity in most water recipes.
So that is some awesome things that you guys can take home right now and do. I feel like, first off, you need to go check Lotus out, because I don't see anyone doing this out there. So if you guys really want to improve your coffee, I really think you guys should check Lotus out. So now to dive back into this, Nick. So if someone doesn't purchase Lotus, how can they improve their water at home?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing you want to determine is what is your tap water? Can you just use your tap water at home? Because there are a lot of places, around the world and around the US that do have tap water that can be really delicious in making coffee. So to do that, you can go to your municipality's water report, and not all municipalities give you the information that you want. But really what you're looking at is you want to find out what the general hardness of your water is and the general alkalinity of that water. And most water recipes, and actually, I'll just go off the SCA. The SCA specifies that you want between, if I remember correctly, I think it's 75 and 150 parts per million hardness. And actually, I can't remember if they specify specifically for alkalinity. But yeah, and then generally anywhere between 0 and, I would say for lighter roast, maybe 60 parts per million of alkalinity. So if you're below those numbers, really what you would want to do is kind of just maybe compare your tap water to, if you can try a friend's recipe or something like that, just to determine if you even need to do anything to your water. If you are well outside of those range, you have 3 options as I see it. You can buy kind of from one of our competitors, which I think are a great option, honestly. And most of our competitors sell a sachet of dry minerals, and you open that and you just pour it into a gallon of water. And I think that's a really easy solution for anyone who wants to make kind of a custom water, but is like, I don't even know, I don't know if I should use calcium or magnesium. It's just kind of overwhelming for them. You can try one of those pre-made recipes, and I think that's really going to get you, if your tap water is not good, that's going to get you there. You can also make your own water if you want to go for kind of a more long-term economical solution, and you don't mind putting a little bit of work in. And for that, there's a lot of resources. I'd be happy to kind of provide some, but I'll just call one out. Jonathan Gagne's blog is great. He kind of goes over how to make your own concentrates at home. But that definitely is a decent amount of work, and if you don't like math, it can be a little bit of a frustrating one.
Right. So what if someone wanted to buy bottled water? Like, if me and you have talked offline about this before. So can you hit the viewers with, if they were like, I don't want to do any of this, what is the best bottle of water I should use?
No, I wish I had I used to keep a list of the bottled waters and the minerality. The problem is it's somewhat difficult to find what's in these bottled waters. A lot of them publish it. Some of them you have to email them though and kind of ask like, hey, what's in this? The issue with bottled waters is that when you are making a water to taste good to drink as water, it's actually going to differ from what we are generally looking for in coffee. And so bottled waters end up either with really, really low minerality. So you take something like Smart Water, for example. That's actually 10 parts per million of calcium hardness, magnesium hardness, and potassium bicarbonate alkalinity. And so you can make that with Lotus. You just use 1 drop of each of those 3 ingredients. But that's going to result in a coffee, most likely, that's going to be maybe a little tea-like, probably pretty sour just because it has low alkalinity. If you look at something else like, Fiji water, that's really high in alkalinity. So when you drink it as just water, you get kind of this short, crisp finish. And it also has a decent amount of calcium and magnesium, which kind of create a smoothness in the flavor. But in your coffee, it's going to tend to be maybe a little bit over extracted. But the real difference is that's actually going to be kind of flat tasting because of all the alkalinity.
Right.
So I know there are some bottled waters out there that do strike a good balance, and I'll hesitate to mention any of them because I can't actually remember, the specific ones. But if you
Well,
if you
I messed
Google
up with
that,
one that I had talked to you about, and it didn't bow over too well. It was
yeah,
the most sour tasting cup of coffee I've
yeah,
ever had.
and that's kind of I actually did use bottled water. When I discovered, hey, water is important. I tried a lot of different things. I tried a lot of solutions before I landed on Lotus. So I did brew with smart water, and yeah, the coffees were a little sour. I don't think the results were terrible. But once I switched to making my own water, and specifically for each cup, for each coffee, I knew what the ingredients did. I knew that for me, the way I like to brew, I could never go back.
Right.
I always want to be able to control that variable.
Now, are you dialing the water in every time like you would grind your beans up and dial your espresso individually every time? Is that, or are you using like pre-made? It's already
Yeah, so so Lance, my partner and co-founder, he really, so when I brought him onto the team, he kind of provided that coffee expertise. He's a much better taster than I am. He's much more familiar with the industry as a whole, and so he created our two recipes, light and bright and simple and sweet. And the idea behind this is kind of just what the names sound like. Light and bright was meant to create a really bright, high acidity coffee,
right.
really kind of in line with what's trending in the industry right now. Lots of light roasts, really accenting
Sure.
the citrus flavors. Simple and sweet is kind of a little bit more of a well-rounded approach, and that's actually the recipe that I typically start with when I'm brewing a coffee for the first time. And after I brew that, I'm kind of asking myself, what do I want out of this coffee? What do I think this coffee is good at? How can I make it more balanced? That's typically something that I really prize in a cup is balance of the different flavors. And, obviously grind size, pour over recipes, stuff like that, but also water are kind of the adjustments that I'm making. And usually with the water, I know kind of right away. The two big things I change are what's my hardness source? Is it mainly magnesium or is it mainly calcium?
Right.
Choosing kind of the alkalinity ingredient. If there's any kind of funky or off flavors I want to hide, that's a really good indicator that some sodium bicarbonate would do well with that coffee. And so, yeah, in combination with some of the other factors, water is definitely something that I adjust and typically know right away, like, this is what I want to do next time with this coffee.
Right. All right. Now, speaking of that, what is your setup, your at-home setup? So if you were dialing in the perfect espresso, just let the viewers know what Nick's of Lotus Coffee, what is his setup? What is
Yeah.
he?
So for espresso, I'm actually fairly new, and this is not my coffee bar back here, but I did set up some decorations, I guess you could say, for
Okay.
the podcast. So yeah, so I actually recently picked up a Flare 58. I waited a long time to get into espresso because I really wanted to, and I wouldn't say I've mastered pour over. There's always more to learn, but I'm confident in it. And so yeah, I recently dove into espresso, and I chose the Flare 58 because I really, coming from my engineering background, when I first looked at espresso machines, it blew my mind that a lot of the older espresso machines didn't even have a shot timer. I was like,
Right,
how
right.
can you not, that's a, and maybe I hadn't pulled a lot of espresso, so I thought maybe I'm wrong, maybe these variables are important, but that was kind of my natural idea, and so the flare to me was a way to really control those variables. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. This is my only espresso maker at this point in time.
I feel
Uh,
like it's more satisfying. I feel like anything that's manual, like, like it's more, I wouldn't say primitive, but
yeah,
it's like you're hand making the espresso. You are pulling a lever and you're pushing pressure through a portafilter. I feel like it's just, I don't know.
I think the beauty of coffee is there's so many different ways to enjoy it. You can make
Right.
the end cup taste different. You can really cater it to your style. You can add milk to your drink. But yeah, you can also brew a different way. And so for me, kind of what you said there, it's there's really something special about doing it manually. And that was something that led me to that setup, using the flare for espresso. Because for me, uh, coffee, like most people, is the one of the first things I do in the morning, and it's as much as I'm making a beverage to consume, it's also kind of a form of meditation. It's just a way
Right.
to start the day. And, I really think it's cool how the coffee industry places so much emphasis on appreciating the people who grew the coffee. All the parties involved in making coffee. And so I try and kind of be mindful and aware of that while I'm making my coffee. And yeah, the manual element
Hmm.
really kind of fits in with that.
Oh, I bet it's amazing if you were to grab a hand grinder and hand grind your beans and then you do the flare. I feel like that's
But
just
yeah,
I feel like that is the most
it's
hardworking cup of espresso that you could
yeah.
possibly have.
I didn't set it out here, but yeah, my grinder for espresso is Easy Presso.
Those are
Um,
amazing. Those are
yeah,
Hey, if you guys and I wouldn't say that I'm sponsored by anybody, but Easy Presso makes the best hand grinders in my opinion. I don't know. I love them. I feel like
yeah,
they are so well engineered and the crispness with grinding, beans with those, and the fact that you can dial them in, like, with the microns and everything, that you can dial them in perfectly, it's amazing. I've always
oh
enjoyed the
yeah,
Easy Pressos.
yeah. It's kind of funny, I feel kind of conflicted, I guess, being a business owner in the coffee industry. I feel like I should maybe have more knowledge of a lot of the brewing equipment out there. But realistically, my style is I carefully select the different pieces and have slowly added them over time. But I really prefer to become a master of just one piece of equipment rather than having a multitude. And to each their own. I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it by any means, but I really prefer having fewer pieces of equipment, but being very, very familiar with them so that, they're more powerful tools. If you selected a good piece and you know how to use it really well, I think that's um, oftentimes better than having a wide selection of different burrs or different pour overs. I think there's many great products out there. Um, and you can really choose any of them that speak to you to make good coffee with.
For sure. Do you think that's from your engineering background? Like, as far as, like, enjoying the ability to be able to dial in precise measurements with coffee? Do you think that's what intrigues you the most about, dialing coffee in?
Yeah, yeah, and that's so really what got me excited about coffee. To begin with, my first experience, and I don't think my friend, the barista who I first met and got me into specialty coffee, I don't think he'll mind me picking on him. He was very much kind of the craft of coffee.
Okay.
It was a very much an art form, and he makes amazing coffee. He's as good or better of a brewer than me. But yeah, our approaches were very different. He kind of did things by tradition, and it was very by feel, versus me. I would ask him questions when he was kind of helping me learn to brew at home, and he'd be like, I don't know the answer to that question. why do you
Right.
why do you want to know? And I'm like, well, this is vital to to make, asking questions about what should the flow rate through the brewer be. So yeah, I definitely like to know the variables and have control. I will say though, that over the years, I've learned kind of the limitations of a scientific approach. I think that understanding how variables affect your coffee and diving into the science of them is really important. But at the end of the day, it really is about what does the coffee in your cup taste like.
Right.
And part of the reason I find coffee so fascinating and such a fun industry to be in is because it's too complicated to solve with science alone. At some point, you need to put all that behind you and utilize the knowledge you have and the control over the variables you have. But it does become a craft where you just have to taste the cup and use your experience and the tools that you have to kind of try and create the best cup. And I think that's beautiful that it's not kind of this simple system that can be completely solved just by using a kind of a scientific approach.
Right, there's so many factors with coffee, it's crazy. I don't think most people understand that, and, most people, they just want caffeine straight to the face, just caffeine,
Right.
or give me the darkest cup of coffee you got, but most people don't understand what goes into coffee. So, when most people are learning coffee, right, they go into, like, different avenues of researching, watching videos, reading books, or and whatnot. What would you say your preferred learning method is when it came to, finding out your new passion in coffee?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed reading, and in fact, even at university, that's kind of where I really learned the most. I loved reading the textbooks. I think that was kind of weird to some of my classmates. I know they read it, but I mean, I literally just enjoyed it, and that's actually how I approached coffee too. When I first got into home brewing, I bought the Science and the Craft of Coffee, and I kind of read
Right.
that over the course of a couple weekends. As I mentioned earlier, Scott Rayo's book, I think it was Everything But Espresso was the first book of his that I read. A more
Great
recent
book, by
one,
the way.
yeah, and when I read those books and kind of saw this different approach, this very kind of analytical, I think both Scott Rayo and the Craft and Science of Coffee, they're very analytical in their approach, and I really enjoyed that. And so, yeah, a lot of my learning takes place in the form of books. But I will say I also read a lot of literature on coffee. And most of the subjects that I've kind of tried to educate myself in life, that's an approach I take. And there, it's always fun when a lot of these problems aren't solved. In fact, there was a recent paper kind of going over the unevenness of extraction
Mhm.
in espresso, kind of talking about how if you grind too fine, you actually get less extraction. And they kind of had a hypothesis as to why that was. And, I think there's a lot more attention on, that type of research in coffee. And so, yeah, there's a lot of content to read right now, and it's definitely exciting.
Yeah, I think what's so amazing about reading is, like, I feel like I'm getting handwritten notes from the roaster or the barista, like, so or, any coffee expert. I feel like I'm getting handwritten notes and I'm reading a manual. So
Yeah.
that's really why I enjoy reading the books.
Well, I think the other avenues of learning using videos online or kind of reading blogs and stuff are very useful. My issue maybe with that, or why I choose not to take that route, is that I find it more difficult to kind of find information that's quality. When you go into the online space, if you're on videos and stuff like that, there's all varying degrees of quality of information. There's some people who, they like Lance, he lives and breathes coffee, and I think he's incredibly knowledgeable, and I've learned a lot from his videos. But to be honest, when I first started in coffee and watched some other videos online, on YouTube, there were kind of mixed messages. There were conflicting pieces of information, and it was kind of frustrating to me, especially when there wasn't much of a scientific explanation.
Right.
It was kind of hard because I would see these people, and I could only assume that they were making better coffee than I was. Their credentials certainly indicated that that was the case, but I always wanted to know, why are you doing that? There wasn't really this explanation of why that I think a lot of books provide. Books kind of go into that detail. That's really something that I crave. I don't like to try something without having at least a little bit of an understanding of the why behind it.
For sure. And, another thing too is I feel like, just society in general, they're looking for the more simple way to do things. So a lot of the videos you watch, everyone's just trying to simplify things. They're trying to take, oh, it's really not that hard if you just do this. And I'm like, no, if you really want good quality, it is going to take time and hard work. I mean, that's really all there is to, especially with coffee. You can't skip steps. You just can't
No,
do it at all. Zero. Like, especially like that is like someone telling you during your water formula, like, hey, you can just skip that step. You don't need to worry about that. It'll taste just the same, and it's, that's not going to turn out too well.
all right. Well, I think the other thing with that approach too is if you just kind of follow somebody else's recipe is, you don't know I guess how much better it could be. You don't know. It's hard to know whether or not you were successful. Maybe
Right.
your coffee tastes good. And for me, you know, when I first started doing that, because that's what I did. I watched videos and I kind of copied other people's techniques. But when I was done, this question of like, well, did I do everything right? Is this actually the best that I could have achieved? Or is there a way to improve this further? And if you don't understand the why behind the different things that you've done, it's going to be hard to answer that question.
Right.
And even if you think that you can push further, you're not going to know how to do it, because you know you just kind of followed a pre-made template.
Right. So where, I was going to ask this towards the end of the episode, but what is your full blown plan with Lotus? Like, what give me your 10-year plan? I wanted to wait till the end of the episode, but I kind of want to ask now.
Yeah, so to be honest, you know, I don't know for sure where Lotus is going to go. There are definitely some directions we're looking. The mission statement, kind of the idea behind Lotus, is to create innovative products that are easy to use and really empower people to brew better coffee at home.
Right.
And so, kind of, what that means is to provide tools. And realistically, you know, I'll just use Lotus water as an example. It's a tool that lets you kind of harness this technique that people have been using for a long time, but without kind of having to go through all the hassle of figuring out the best workflow or how to
Right.
mix the concentrates. And so it's kind of a simplification of that. It just increases the accessibility. And that's kind of what I want to do. That's, you know, when I'm reading these kind of up and coming scientific articles, my thought is that as we all learn more about the industry, you know, if Lance or I see other opportunities, things that we think are overlooked, just like water was overlooked, for people to really improve their coffee at home, those are kind of the products that we want to develop.
Right.
But I really don't want to put out anything just for the sake of putting it out, you know, for just for the sake of meeting a financial goal of the business or something like that. It really has to be something that is going to improve and progress the industry.
For sure.
Um, you know, so and that's kind of why I'm giving maybe a little bit of an open-ended answer. Is I
No,
don't
that's fine.
know for sure what that's going to be, but whatever we do, that will be the mission. And you know, I can say though, with water, we are planning some other products. So water is definitely going to be a focus. I don't think that that topic is fully explored or you know can't be improved upon. And you know, for the near future, this isn't a 10-year plan, but to speak on the future of the water aspect, I think to add value to the product that we've already created,
Right.
something that I'm really excited about is uh, kind of bridging the gap between roasters, the coffees that they're putting out, and the end consumer by providing the water that the roaster is using to the end consumer. So we're working on an app right now, and what it's going to let you do is select the roaster that you're using. So let's say you know, you got a bag of Ilsa coffee, and you want to kind of brew that in the style that roaster intended for it to be brewed. You could go look them up on the app, assuming they had provided us with the information of what water recipe they wanted to use, and it would tell you how to make Ilsa's recommended water with Lotus. And so then
Okay.
you could make that coffee and kind of really experience like, hey, this is at least closer to what the roaster was experiencing when they made this coffee.
Right.
I really think that's a direction that I'm excited about that we're definitely heading.
So that's awesome. First off, that would be like, I think everyone needs that. They need the opportunity to improve their coffee. Especially, you know, people getting into coffee, they don't even understand how important water is, which we touched on that earlier. Just giving them the opportunity and throwing that out there with them buying a bag of coffee, like that's awesome. Like, oh, like it's out there. I didn't know that water dramatically improved my coffee that much, and I feel like that will increase the need for Lotus or any other formulas for improving water.
Yeah. And along those lines too, another thing that I really want to do with Lotus is kind of connect with the community too. You're talking about people getting into coffee, and it's a struggle. And I think, a huge part of that, there aren't easy solutions. And so it's kind of the education piece. So I've been talking with some local baristas here, and kind of asking them if they want to put out some Lotus recipes. And I think it's a really neat way for baristas to interact with people coming into the shops, and it's kind of a tool for them to communicate. Here's a how to make better coffee at home, or
Right.
someone says, hey, this is the issue I'm having. They can kind of help them in that way.
For sure. I'm starting to see that more and more on, some of the, specialty coffee roasters. I'm starting to see them put, like, basically recipes on their bags, like, "Hey, to dial our coffee in, like, if you don't have a scale, use this many tablespoons," like, etcetera. And which
Yeah.
I think is awesome, because if you look at, like, I'm not gonna name any brands, some of the old mass-produced coffee brands out there, people are just throwing tablespoon after tablespoon
Yep.
in a coffee pot.
No, I agree. I love that when, I get a card that says, hey, try this brew recipe, or something like that. Um, that, yeah, I love that, because that is a question I have if I brew coffee, and, especially one that maybe I don't prefer as much. Um, the question I have is, hey, is this what they wanted? If the roaster or the farmer took a sip of this, would they say, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to make? And that's fine. We all have different preferences, but it is, I think, a challenge in our industry to kind of make that connection. And yeah, I love that when roasters put out recipes on how to brew their coffees.
For sure. And now let me ask you this question. Do you think now there is also a negative side to this too. So what do you think about all of the less quality, I wouldn't say less quality companies, but companies just in it for the money? What do you think that's kind of doing to the industry right now? Because I feel like everyone sees that coffee is an easy endeavor, and
Yeah.
they are just mass producing coffee, and it's kind of diluting the quality, in my
Do,
opinion.
do you mean from like the coffee, strictly the coffee roaster perspective, or
I would
coffee
say
equipment?
all of it. If you look around, most people think that the entire coffee industry, like, is it's an easy buy. They can get into business real easy. They can start selling coffee, they can get in, into business with a roaster, and it could be less quality, but they're just gonna be putting, pounds and pounds of coffee out that, one, isn't specialty, and two, that it doesn't have as it wouldn't have delicate hands on it that actually took really good care of the coffee.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean there, and I definitely see that happening. I think, the first thing I want to say is, I think, despite any negatives alongside that, it's an amazing thing. It's a big positive that the specialty industry is booming. That there are
Right.
so many
Yeah.
new roasters. That right there,
That's
all
awesome.
the new coffee equipment. I love that. That
Yeah.
makes me so happy to be here. And, I guess there's two parts. One, I think, and actually, Lance is addressed this on his YouTube channel, talking about all the hype kind of surrounding a lot of these grinders.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's similar, to all the roasters popping up. There's a lot of hype in the community right now, and I think that's good. But I do think it's an opportunity for the people who are really involved in the community to dictate what the culture is going forward. And I think that's important to say, these are our values. So as new roasters come in, the people that are helping them and mentoring them, at least I hope that they're kind of seeking that. I think it's on those individuals to express, in a kind way, these are the values of the coffee industry. And not to say that there's a specific type of coffee that they should be making or anything, but I think we have a really cool thing going in the specialty industry. And I guess to be more specific, what I'm talking about, an emphasis on transparency,
Right.
putting the emphasis on, hey, this is who grew the coffee, things like that. I think we need to work hard to keep those things alive in the coffee industry. And if we can do that, if we can keep the focus and keep these positive values going, then I think that, kind of the booming industry, and the fact that so many other players are coming to the table, I think that's a wonderful thing. But yeah, it's important that we stay focused on what makes the specialty coffee industry such a great place to be.
Oh, it's amazing. Like I love it. Like because for the longest time, mass coffee was just a popular coffee, and I'm not going to say any brands, but all the mass producing coffees was like that was in America's cup.
Yeah,
Um, so I feel like now specialty coffee and new roasters and small coffee shops and new baristas, I feel like that's coming to the forefront. One, due to social media, and then plus people are tired of lower quality products. They are wanting to be able to dial in their coffee and enjoy the coffee more and more as time goes on.
yeah. I think there's also something else that's important to note here too, is I think the specialty industry needs to be more aware of different consumer preferences.
Right.
Uh, and actually there was a really neat paper from UC Davis. I can't remember. I think it was somewhat recent. And they essentially found that there were two, and actually I've also seen other people argue that there are three different kind of styles of coffee. And when I say styles of coffee, I mean, we're talking about, quality coffee, not Folgers or something like that, but different
Right.
profiles. And like, if you poll people and say, hey, what flavors, what characteristics do you look for in a good cup? You're going to get different answers.
For sure.
Some people are going to say brightness, high acidity is absolutely what you should have in your cup. And there are other people that are going to want to tone that down. They're going to want more chocolate notes or roasty. And actually, a personal experience on that note, I have only been brewing, very quality specialty coffee at home for the most part. I think most of the coffee I buy is, I don't know the ratings on all of it, but almost certainly above 85, 87. I know the roasters. It's all been good stuff. I bought a bag of medium roast from Trader Joe's. My wife actually suggested. She said, "Hey, you should kind of try this." It's like, I don't know, that's not coffee that I drink. And I
Right.
pulled a shot of espresso, and Josh, it was magical.
No,
The
really?
amount, oh my gosh. And actually, so before I brewed it too, before I made the espresso, I looked at it and I was like, I don't even want to do it. And I actually put the bag back in my pantry after opening it for the first time. And it sat there, I think it sat there for like 2 months. And
Really?
I cracked it open a couple months later, and it was incredible. The chocolate notes that came through. I mean, it was like a bar of dark chocolate.
Did
And
you find
I
out where who roasted it?
yeah, honestly, I have the bag. I can go grab it. But what it told me is I felt like I had been almost lied to by the specialty industry of hey, citrusy, light roasted coffees. That's it. That's the goal. That's what we drink, and we don't talk about the other stuff.
Right.
And I want to explore it more because that's really my only experience. But that my first thought was this is incredible. It was, and I want to note it was a completely different beverage. And I think that's the thing is when you kind of compare those two. I prefer the citrus coffees. I prefer a koji anaerobic,
Right.
that's what I prefer. But I think the other style is preferred by a lot of other people. And I think it's important for the specialty industry to become more aware of what are the different categories of coffee out there. We shouldn't benchmark all coffees to the same standard. And
Right.
I apologize, I'm kind of going off on our rant here, but I think another way to look at that, another industry that's doing that well, is actually the beer industry. I
For
was reading
sure.
an article in Roast magazine, and the author was saying that they took a class in beer judging, and they have the different categories. You have, your stout. Honestly, I don't know that much about beer, so
Right.
apologies to any beer drinkers if I mess this up. But you have your stout or your IPA, and when you judge those, you judge them to a different set of criteria. And I think something similar to that is something that we might be able to implement in the specialty coffee industry.
For sure. And if you've noticed this, most like coffee, I wouldn't say coffee addicts, but people that love coffee are also into craft beers.
Yeah,
Like I don't know, it's got to have some tie together,
yeah. I think it would be a very natural industry to kind of learn from and maybe take some plays out of the book from.
For sure. Okay, so I wanted to dive into this with you as well. So, is there any tips you can give anyone that are, I guess, starting out in the coffee industry or just any industry? What kind of tips do you have for these guys that are just scared to take the step, or they're nervous about, I guess, focusing on something that's out of the norm for them, pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of maybe a little bit of a hard question for me to answer because I think everyone learns different ways, but the way that I've kind of gone about it, I think really served me well as far as deep diving very quickly into the industry. It's hard to remember because I do remember when I first started out Lotus, I felt the same way. I was kind of intimidated because I hadn't been in coffee for many, many years, right? You
Right.
know, and so I was worried that people wouldn't take me seriously. So my advice would be to read a book. Pick. I think there's a lot out there, but really find a resource that speaks to you, and maybe it's videos too. Maybe it is a YouTuber, but find a reliable source of information and put some time in to study it. And once you've done that, then go experiment a little bit. For me, kind of brewing at home, I really took everything one step at a time. The scientific method is really rooted in only changing one variable and keeping everything else the same to see how that works. And so when on my journey to kind of becoming a competent brewer, I purposefully took it slow. I would only I'm just going to focus on grinding, so I'm going to change the grinding setting on my recipe, and then I'm going to change it down. I'm going to do it with different coffees and kind of really doing an exploration of that variable to fully understand it. Because if you go and you try one recipe and then you change the water, the grind size, and the brewer you're using, if you keep doing that, going through that and trying to apply your knowledge, it's too complex. You're never going to really understand any of those variables. So yeah, you almost, there's so much to learn. You almost need to treat it like you're going to school and learn about a topic, pick one at a time, and then go experiment a little bit with that. And yeah, so I know that's not an easy route, but if you really
Right.
want to be confident in what you're doing, I think that's a great way to do it.
For sure. Now, would you say that you would apply that to learning coffee as well? Like, so let's say you were diving into coffee. Would you do everything, or would you say, all right, I'm going to focus on pour overs for a while and then I'll upgrade to something else until you have pour overs dialed in? Or would you just say, hey, try it all?
Yeah, exactly. No, so that's what I'm saying. So I didn't, and again, I don't want to say that this is the best way to do it, but yeah, this would be my advice because this is how I did it. But yeah, I started with one pour over. I had one grinder. So I had the Fellow Ode grinder. I can actually say what they were. And actually, I got
Right.
most of my stuff from Fellow. I got
Okay.
the Stag kettle, and then I had their brewer. Maybe I'm mixing these names up. I see this thing. I research stuff and I buy
No,
it,
you're good, Nick.
and then it just doesn't matter. I basically had the full pour over setup from Fellow, and I had no intention of kind of expanding beyond that until I had quote unquote conquered it. And so I kind of went through each of the different things, changing the different variables, filter paper or water temperature, and kind of really, really exploring just the simple setup that I had. And to be honest, I haven't expanded my setup that far beyond it. I did a little bit to experiment with some of the other stuff out there, and I do think, so that brewer was a flat bottom brewer, and I think there is a difference between that and a cone brewer. So I kind of moved on once I had figured out the flat bottom. I switched over to cone, and so on that note, the first time I brewed on a cone brewer, it was pretty bad.
Really?
I thought it was going to be easy. I was like, this is what most everyone uses, but I'm already making good stuff over here.
Right.
Uh, and so I kind of had to, learn like, all right, what is different about this brewer? What's different about the style of coffee it makes, and what do we need to be doing to kind of get there? But when I switched to a cone brewer and I first tried out a different brewer, I mastered it much more quickly because I had spent so much time learning the individual variables before that.
Okay.
Just experimenting with grind size for a little while, just experimenting with water. Um, and I think the downside to that approach is it takes a while. It took me, I think it was probably a year of brewing, 2 to 3 pour overs per day with a lot of intention and focus on kind of what I was doing before I got to a point where I could just brew a coffee and then know, all right, this is what I need to change to dial it in and come pretty close.
That's awesome. Okay, so as far as your products go, Nick, like, do you plan on offering bigger sizes for bottles, or are you just going to stick with the same sizes?
Yeah, so we've toyed around with offering bigger sizes. I think more so what we'll go towards is refills, and those might be bigger sizes. Uh,
Okay.
the other thing we're really looking for is kind of going back to closing the gap between roasters, what they intended, and the final cup for home brewers. We are kind of keen to partner with some roasters to make
Right.
a little bit of an easier. So instead of using the app and a Lotus water set to recreate water, having roasters profile in kind of a pre-made solution that you can buy separately, or really ideally it would come with their coffee. So especially if you're looking at someone just getting into coffee, I mean that's truly the easiest way is if they got a bag of coffee, but it included water to brew that coffee with, the minerals to mineralize the water. So that's kind of more the direction we're heading. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if the market kind of wants bigger sets of Lotus, we'll absolutely listen to our customers and do our
I
best.
will buy everything you have, Nick. Most of it. So it's seriously, guys, if you have not toyed around with water, you need to. Like I get it. You could have the grinder, you could have everything, but what were we talking about the other day, Nick? It's what, 98% water? That's what
Yeah,
it is.
98% water.
It is one of the most important elements of coffee. You guys definitely need to focus on water. And you can reach Nick at lotus.com. And also, you have one page, right? Instagram, or is it on Facebook as well?
Just Instagram. So it's lotus.coffee.products on Instagram, and it's
Okay.
lotuscoffeeproducts.com is our website.
Awesome. You guys need to go over there and check him out and buy up all the water for sure. Actually, it's a mineral set, right?
Yeah, I mean it's
Okay.
it's in water, so yeah.
Okay.
Technically, it's
Awesome. I just want to make sure I get that
yeah,
right.
yeah, it's water. I think we can call it that.
Okay, so I give usually a daily quick shot to any individual. So if someone just stumbled across this and they zoomed right to the end, give them the best tips in pouring the best cup of coffee they possibly can in under 30 seconds.
Ooh, I mean, I may be a little biased here, but the most important thing is to start with good ingredients. You have to have good coffee and you have to have good water. And honestly, I really think those are the two biggest variables. If you nail those two and you kind of get a generally good coffee to water ratio, the grind size, the pour over technique, all of those are really secondary to just having good quality ingredients.
Awesome. You guys, you heard it here first. All right. Water is important. So let's hop right on that. All right, Nick, I appreciate you coming on today, brother.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Josh.
Yeah. And anytime you release any other products, I will bring you back on the podcast and we will throw it out to the population.
I would love to come back.
All right. Awesome, Nick. I'll catch you later, brother.
All right. See ya.